Welcome to the Future of Work Live. Hosted by Mark Salisbury, author of the new book, Socrates Digital for Learning and Problem Solving. Each 25-minute episode with Mark and his guests prepares you for the upcoming new world of work.
Welcome to the Future of Work Live. I'm Mark Salisbury, your host. Today, Tom King will be my guest, and he will discuss human learning in a machine learning world. But before we break to Tom, have you ever wondered how you can tell if a show is live or if a show is recorded? Well, this is a live show, I can assure you, because Tom King cannot get on. Last week, if you joined in, Scott Moody had some problems getting on, and so I haven't seen Tom yet. I've been talking to him on the phone, and he is scrambling to be able to get his connection working and be able to join us. So that's how you can tell that a show is live or not. Most of you actually watch this show as a recording. We don't get very many people live. I'm going to actually click and see if we've got some live people coming in. And if you're live here, go ahead and send me a little message here. Help me fill in this time so while Tom is preparing. And we'll see if we can get him on today. As you know, we have a short show on purpose because we want to give people the message and move on. And just in case you're wondering, we did practice this, just the connections and all those kinds of things. We don't practice all of the stuff that we talk about because then it would be boring to us and it would be boring to you too. But we do work out the logistics. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get Tom and see if we are making any progress in being able to get him on today. And so we might have a shorter show than we normally do. And so please consider, if you're watching this message, we got voicemail for Tom. Well, I'm going to burn up a couple of minutes here while we're waiting for Tom. And if you remember when we were waiting for Scott Moody, I started talking about my new book. And here's Tom. As soon as I mention my new book, there our guest comes in. And so here we go. And this is Tom, and I'm going to go ahead, and I'm glad you're here because I was going to start talking about my book again, and you know how boring that is. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to work on the captions here, and we'll give you the proper caption. So we'll get here and get started with this.
And, well, thank you to you and your listeners for patience with me.
Yeah. Well, it's probably my fault, but I'll blame you, of course, when you're not a guest anymore. And so, but you're Tom King, and I actually have an introduction for you. So right here it is. Tom King, in case you folks watching don't know, he has a master's degree in instructional design and over 20 years experience developing and managing e-learning materials and consulting on training. He's also an entrepreneur who co-founded one of the earliest LMS companies. If you're not familiar with that, that's Learning Management Systems, and contributed to global standards of learning in education and training. He's co-inventor on a U.S. patent and owns both a skateboard and a set of golf clubs. Welcome, Tom.
Welcome.
Okay, so I normally have some kind of icebreaker, but I feel like we've already done that, but I'm going to use it anyway. And so you and I met years ago at a large airplane company in the United States. I won't mention them, but it's a large airplane company. And yes. So, I would think that you can answer this easily. So can you explain the physics of an airplane taking off?
Yes, I can, but it would be far more interesting if our friend Mark Schutz did, because he's an aerospace engineer, and he has such a passion for physics. He will watch the local college broadcasts of physics problems to solve them. So I would mention, thrust and drag and lift and air pushing down, and then equivalent air pushing up to lift the airplane. But it wouldn't be all that interesting or probably technically accurate. And I know for a fact, around the time we met, you were actually taking lessons to become a private pilot, and even took your then fiance, I believe, on a flight. So you're better equipped for that than I am.
Oh, very good. You had that exactly right, except it was my wife to be, that was the pilot. I was the first one that went up. Yeah. So, and I'm still here. So, very good. But you're
Yep.
right. I just think that's so funny when you work for a company, people think you know everything about that company and you don't. But let's switch to today's topic. And that is this idea of human learning in a machine learning world. What do you mean by that?
Well, so there's been many fields and subfields of artificial intelligence. And one that's kind of in vogue and being used a great deal now is machine learning, where you take a data set and you have kind of a neural network and convolution maps and all these technical terms. But the gist of it is you show it lots of different pictures of fish, and eventually it recognizes any picture of a fish. And it's kind of
No.
a repetitive task, but it's turned out to be very powerful for things like language translation, computer vision, where we recognize images and so forth. So that's kind of what I mean by machine learning in a machine learning world. There's so much machine learning and talk of machine learning going on right now.
Okay. So how would you contrast, this kind of learning with, how would you contrast human learning with this machine learning you just described?
So I can give you a great example I just saw yesterday or the day before on LinkedIn. So someone sent a picture, and it was a bunch of circular pictures, a whole array of them, of alternating pictures, or semi-alternating pictures of blueberry muffins and small dogs like chihuahuas, their faces. And when you have like a little bit of a warped lens, round picture, sometimes it's hard to tell if that's an English muffin or a dog. And they said, this is the kind of adversarial training you'll give to machine learning to try and recognize this. Now, as an example of human learning, I saw that, and I thought of a case many years ago. I was visiting a friend in Miami, and his son was very into basketball. I know someone else who's into basketball. And there were a couple of big name players that had gone to Miami and played for the team down there. I don't know what it is, Miami Humidity or something. Maybe you know the name.
Yeah.
Anyway, or Miami Retirees. I don't remember. Anyway, sorry, Florida, just joking. He made a cake, and he made this elaborate cake that was shaped like a basketball. And I spent kind of an afternoon as he was, taking sort of flat cylindrical cakes and stacking them and shaping them into a basketball. And I saw this English muffin, artificial intelligence, like how would AI, sort of spot the dog in this sort of cloud of blueberry muffins. And I saw that and I thought, my wife watches a lot of these baking shows. I wonder if you could make a cupcake instead of a muffin, and maybe put some coconut on it, and maybe use a cashew as the beak, and create sort of a fake bald eagle cupcake out of that. Now, I don't think machine learning would have taken previous learning that it had of watching someone make a cake, some background knowledge of your wife watching a lot of these holiday baking shows, and put that together and said, like, I'll bet you I could make a little cupcake that looked like an American eagle or a bald eagle. So, that's an example of human learning where we take these disparate things and it's not all pattern learning. That's the kind of learning I'm interested in, as opposed to, oh boy, sometimes we try and give people machine learning type stuff where you just kind of scroll and then click continue, or you scan and click the right arrow button over in the corner and go through. And to me, that really feels more like sort of training derived compliance, where we're making sure someone knows a procedure or recognizes terms, and we're just kind of feeding them information like we would feed the machine learning all kinds of English muffins and blueberry muffins and dog pictures to get it to learn the difference. I think we could do a little better with humans, although sometimes, we have to comply with regulations and so forth.
Yeah. Well, for humans, we would automatically recognize those as dogs because we see the little fuzzy vests on and they'd all be playing cards around a pool table. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's how we
Or we
would
catch
do it.
Paris Hilton in the background in her purse, and we recognize them.
And so let's get into this a little bit more. This kind of new learning you're talking about in a world of smart intelligence machines that also learn is, why is it different? What's different about that? What we should be learning as people in the workplace?
I don't know if it's different or just recognizing what we've known all along and how changes affect us. And we're kind of, we've got the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, and we're so aware of machine learning and this pressure with global pandemic and doing kind of Zoom meetings and online learning in that form and self-paced learning that we kind of forget about sort of apprenticeships and inspiration. And I think a lot of our learning is in fact training, and it's more about enabling than empowering. So I think of apprenticeships. You learned a lot of skills and you were faced with some challenges, and you kind of worked with a master and saw the exceptions and other things they dealt with, rather than kind of a linear progression to sort of check the box and indicate you got something done.
Yeah, and I also think it's and you and I have talked about this at one time, is that it's dealing with things that are kind of off the radar, the exception. And the story I have about that is, many years ago, is I was getting money out of one of these ATMs, and at my bank. So instead of going inside, I was too lazy to go in the door, so I just go and I get the money out of the ATM, and it gave me an extra $20 bill. And I'm looking around first to see if anyone sees me. But I've got this extra one in my hand, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to give it back. And so I went inside the bank, and I came up to the teller, and I said, your machine here, I was just using it. And he goes, well, did you have a problem? Did it short you? And I go, no. And he goes, well, there's a form here to fill out if you've been shorted any money. And I go, no, it actually gave me an extra $20 bill. And so you just think I dropped something on the floor or something. It was just quiet. And he looks at me and he goes, an extra one. And I said, yes. And he said, are you sure? like take this away, right? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. So it turns out they didn't have a process taking back a $20 bill. And so, he calls his boss over. His boss gets on the phone and talks to somebody in the district office. And then they gave me this kind of handmade form, and I filled it out and I gave them the $20 bill and I left. And so it strikes me that whenever things are routine and they're always predictable, that machines can not only do those things, but they can also adapt by learning and how those parameters change. But when you have this thing we call double loop learning, where the assumptions are gone, they're out the window, and then you need to look at something else, but that's kind of what we need to be able to do. And then, so I don't know, do you see it that way?
Yes. In fact, I will admit I was doing a little bit of preparation, and I was reminded of a friend of mine, Avron Barr, worked on a book all about artificial intelligence, and he met all these great people. And I happened to be at a meeting in Washington, D.C., and I got to meet people like Dexter Fletcher and Doug Lynette and Alan Kay. And we were kind of working in small groups. And I had no knowledge of what Doug had worked on. And I think it's an interesting project. And people who are interested in learning and listening to this might want to just spend a few minutes on Wikipedia looking up a project called CYC, which is really based off of encyclopedia. And it's about general knowledge. So I think Marvin Minsky said that a lot of experts say,
well, usually these pauses don't go quite this long. So this is how you can be unsure or in an uncertain world, is that I don't know if my audience can still see me, or if I'm the one that's crashed, or if Tom has. Well, it looks like Tom has crashed, and we'll see if he comes back in. So back to my book. It's called Digital Socrates for Learning and Problem Solving. And here's Tom. See, as soon as I mentioned my book, it's like magic. They just come right back. I mentioned my book, Tom, and you were like right back.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whose end froze there because I'm on a wired connection and I've kind of shut down everything that could be running in the background. So I was talking about Doug Lynette and the Psych Project, CYC. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about that is he has been working on it continuously since 1984. And they
Wow.
keep adding more and more rules and trying to combine them and reduce them so that they can kind of get logical closures about general knowledge so that it can understand things that maybe someone in junior high might understand, like every Englishman has a mother and every Englishman has a queen. And you could take that literally that every single Englishman has their own individual queen, but most people would understand that there's one queen for all the men
Yeah.
in England, and each one of them has a mother as well. But getting a machine to understand that turns out to be extraordinarily difficult, especially when we look at the world all around us.
Mhm.
So I think some of those projects in the long term is kind of what I'm thinking of more. And I think it'd be a very worthwhile use of time for people to read through that, even if you're working on, instructional design, compliance training, procedural training, just to think about developing reasoning skills and kind of allowing, like you were talking about, people to be not just enabled, but empowered to think things through and deal with that exception. Like the ATM just, was making it rain and kept spitting out money at me. What do I do?
Yeah. 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 Very good. And that's a great example of Doug Lynette. Um, let's go ahead and I don't know if I ever told you this, but I actually knew Dexter Fletcher from University of Oregon years ago. And so another little connection there. Well, let's go to this one here, kind of bring this in for a landing, so to speak, in the airplane business. Is how can our audience, who are right now, they're kind of listening to this and going, learning different ways, how can they leverage this new kind of learning in the workplace? How would they approach it and think about it and think about developing it?
I think it's about bringing your whole person and all your experiences. When you think about that machine learning program, oh, did I freeze up again?
Nope, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
um,
I
when you
do
think
this
about
sometimes to freak out my guests. I just like, I'm still.
okay. When you think about
Yeah, I
machine
got a
learning,
mean
it's
streak in
looking
me.
at the same examples over and over again. And it's not
Yeah.
thinking about, like, is it possible chocolate chip cookies could look like a chihuahua as well? What else should I look at? So when you think about how you spend your off hours, your hobbies, your interests, I know at some jobs, there's maybe a Sunday sermon I heard that inspired me with some sort of process improvement or an approach to learning that I could apply to work. So think about those things and kind of be less of a linear thinker and bring other experiences to bear.
Yeah, one of the things I do with my students, and I teach technical, I'm in the computer science department here at St. Thomas, and I teach technical things, for the most part. And I've been using this Socratic method of teaching. And part of it is when you look at what Socrates always did, is he would basically say, okay, what's your evidence for your position? Where does that come from? Where's your data?
Hmm.
And then he would say, what's your concept for analyzing that data? And then, of course, the huge one we all know about is what are your assumptions, right? What are you assuming whenever you're going to look at the problem this way? And what you'll find that this is very appropriate in technical areas is that usually when people get things wrong, they've made assumptions that aren't true, right? They've made assumptions that in the case of my class, they have the right data set, that those data sets have the right data types. And then they go and they look at it and it's not, and it gives them unexpected results. And I do think that's one of the things that we have as human beings is we can step back a little bit and we can go, okay, these wonderful machines are processing things like loans, right, for a big bank and seeing if people are good loan applicants, but they're making certain assumptions. What are those? And then how can we bring those to light? And then how's that change, the way we look at things? And I think that's part of what we learn as human beings in the workplace and what we can bring. And does that ring true with kind of your experience? I know you have a lot of experience with learning in the workplace.
Yes, and I just came across an interesting one, or was inspired by an article in The Verge about a generation who's less familiar with files, paper files, as well as file hierarchies on a disk drive. And one of the things we bring as humans is not just IQ, but EQ and empathy. And you can question your assumptions both technically and through empathy. So they're finding that sometimes in advanced learning situations, you're looking at a large data set, and you have somebody who sort of came up on iPhones and Androids and Google Chromebooks, and they're not really used to the notion of data stores with a hierarchy and directory paths and files. So some research assistants are kind of getting tutored on what a disk drive is and how you create sort of hierarchies and paths to things, because they're used to finding things just by search, or you open up, Google Docs, and there are your four most recent documents right there, or you can search for one, and you can't always do that with these large data sets. So if you're coming from the old world of being, very familiar with these files, a little empathy and questioning your assumption that people would be used to these could be very helpful in understanding and also working with them to be more collaborative and more productive.
Yeah, I think so. And that's a different, and what I kind of get from it, it's a different kind of learning than what we're so used to. I mean, you've done a lot of training and a lot of, and you've done this on-demand learning and things. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of our on-demand learning and things like that, it's kind of like the old classroom just piped to your desk, right? And so where do you see all of this going, and how do you see this helping people who basically want to thrive in this new world where we're not only learning, but machines are too?
I think it goes back to using your IQ and your EQ, and also just bringing in the variety of your experiences, and also recognizing what the machine is good at. It has great tenacity. It can look at those, chocolate chip cookies all day to spot the ones that aren't going to pass QA at the factory, or determine if it's actually, a small dog that's somehow stuck in the process. They're very good at those tasks of vigilance, but those tasks that require empowerment, inspiration, and so forth are really the things where I would invest my time, rather than sort of memorizing things or recognizing the same patterns over and over again, trying to discern new and emerging patterns.
Yeah, very good. And that's kind of the way I see it too. And we have to kind of train ourselves a little bit to think that way. It's all those things that we actually need to know in our work that we can't look up on Google, right? It's kind of those things. So if we were going to sum up, we're getting close to the end of time here, and how would we sum this up? And I put this up as a takeaway that people could from this show, and that is, leverage your human learning for a machine learning world. And so how would you elaborate on that so people could have something kind of concrete to hang on to?
Like so much of instructional design, it comes back to common sense. Take advantage of your common sense and your general knowledge and apply that to problems. It's trite, but a lot of people, say think outside of the box. Well, you have a broad world. Bring that whole world in when you're thinking about these things and when you're learning, and try to learn things in different areas, because you'll be surprised where you will, in fact, spot or pattern or be inspired by something you learned that's seemingly unrelated, that applies directly to your job once you look at it through a new lens.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you, Tom King, for being with us today. Thank you for being tenacious on keep working on getting into the show, because I make it hard on purpose, because I only want the best and the best guests that are try hard. And so you certainly showed us what it takes to be on this show, and we certainly appreciate that. For our other viewers, I want you to recognize that our next episode is Wednesday at 1 o'clock Central Time. It always is that time. Many of you watch it after that, but you might consider joining us live at some time. So between now and then, we will look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. And thanks again to Tom King for being with us today.
You can find the Future of Work Live episodes in video and podcast format on www.marksalisbury.com. Additionally, YouTube hosts the video episodes on the Future of Work channel, and Apple, Spotify, and Google host the podcasts.